I wanted to talk about my experience with ghosting, which is the practice of basically losing contact or communication with a company when you're interviewing with them. So, this happens to a lot of people where they apply for a job and sometimes they don't hear back. And I don't consider that ghosting because they never reached out to you. But ghosting happens when a company does reach out to you and you email back. Sometimes you get ghosted at the very beginning where you try to set up an interview and your email gets lost. Or you have an interview, you have a phone call, then you don't hear back. So I consider ghosting to be when some contact was made and then you don't hear back. Then that's ghosting. So I wanted to talk about how ghosting has sort of changed throughout my career and how how it's handled differently, if that makes sense, how it changes. So, and I'll keep this short. When doing entry level jobs, I would find a job I liked, apply for the job, just like everyone else, right? Um, Sometimes you hear back, sometimes you don't. But oftentimes, you interview with the company, you have the phone screen. Sometimes you have the second phone screen. Maybe you're lucky you even make it to the first or second, video interview or on-site interview. Um, and then you don't hear back. Sometimes towards the end, you don't hear back, and it's frustrating. It's frustrating because for entry level jobs, you first of all you will never get feedback. I very rarely got feedback. It's unfortunate. I would ask for it, but early in my career, I would interview for jobs, and sometimes I would make it to the first step. Sometimes I made it to the last step. Just before getting an offer. Final round, and I would get ghosted. It happens. It's unfortunate, but it would have happened quite a lot, and there was virtually no feedback. Okay. Then, when applying to mid-level opportunities, I found that communication was a little bit better. For example, at entry-level jobs, I would be like circling back or touching base on like a weekly basis. I was a little bit insecure. I didn't want them to forget about me, so I was always kind of bugging HR. And so I'm the one who's kind of initiating contact, and that's a little frustrating when you're a candidate because a company has says they're interested in you, but then you're not getting good updates. But then when you're applying to more senior jobs, right? So like management, middle management type jobs, I found that communication is a little bit better. So they get back to you in like a timely manner. Like if they said they get back to you like next Friday, they might get back to you next Friday or the Monday after, but they really did try to get back to you Friday or they get back to you Friday evening. So it's more of an even communication where you're not emailing them more often than they are emailing you. It's sort of more even, where they're getting back to you a little bit, on time, periodically, more often, and it's a pleasant experience, right? Because you're applying for a job that uh, is more of an asset to the company, right? There's a little bit more respect, and you're also more credentialed. You have more qualifications, so it's not that you're a dime a dozen. You're someone who's a little bit more established. Now, when you get to the executive roles, when you get to and I don't consider executive roles to just be the C-suite. I like it to encompass executive director, head of IT, global manager, VP, the jobs that are C-level or C-level adjacent. And I tell people this is sort of where it becomes a white glove service, right? Uh, Communication when you're applying for those jobs, if you're qualified, of course. If you're a college kid who's trying to apply to CIO, I don't think you'll hear back. But when you're qualified, you apply for these high level jobs. I found communication to be immaculate, right? I tell people it's a white glove service. I found communication to be, honestly, I feel like the companies speak to you more often. Like you're getting frequent emails, you're getting phone calls. Some of them even text you. Like the HR people will text me from these companies, and there's great feedback, right? So at the mid level management, I didn't mention this. If you don't get the job, there'll sometimes be feedback, and it'll actually be quite thorough. And at the executive level, sometimes you don't get feedback, but majority of the time, I have gotten feedback. So there's great communication, there's great feedback, and when I share these opportunities with others, or I talk about my experiences, like, hey, I interviewed for VP of this health insurance company, and I ended up being neck and neck, but they decided to keep someone who had experience with like other health systems, working in a hospital and like the payer side or something like that. They'll tell me, "Hey, Muhammad, how come HR was so open with you or gave you all this information?" And these aren't people who are necessarily on the same level, so they haven't had those same experiences. And I'll tell them, "Well, when you apply for a VP job or C-level job, um, you are at a very high level. You're probably going to indirectly be their bosses. So HR is a lot nicer to you. The higher up you go, HR is a lot nicer to you. You're gonna get good feedback. They'll actually tell you what went wrong, what went right. Like, and oftentimes I said what's gone against me is just I don't have an MBA. And I said some of these companies they do want an MBA. I sometimes don't have the experience they're looking for in terms of industry. So, for example, if I apply for a VP job with a automotive company, I don't have a background in cars. I don't know that stuff, right? I know IT. I know how we can use IT to essentially support the other business units. But some companies like when their CIO is not just the informatical person, it's not just a technical person, and it's also not just a business person, but it's someone who has some knowledge of the core product. They have a knowledge of all the business lines, of what the company does. So that oftentimes happens where, I apply for CIO of a manufacturing company, a CIO of entertainment company. I don't have a background in entertainment. I don't have background. I have some manufacturing experience, but I don't have a lot. And then I don't have, a lot of automotive experience or any at all. No clients have ever been in that industry. So, whenever I get these feedback, oftentimes, and I'm very proud of this, it's either you don't have an MBA, they went with someone with an MBA, or you don't have this particular experience, right? Like at a health insurance provider in the tri-state area, they were looking for a VP of data. I've been the chief data officer. I have data experience, and they ended up going with someone who worked at a health system that is also a healthcare that's also an insurer, right? They got someone from UPMC, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. So they had that experience. It never comes down to you didn't have the technical knowledge or you didn't have the business acumen. It's always really just there was one cherry on top that this other person possessed that you did not possess. So that's just a very quick overview of how my experience with ghosting has been. Basically, as you move up the ladder, ghosting happens less often. You're going to hear back more. Even if they decline the job, they will at least get back to you. When you apply for entry level jobs, they will not even give you any feedback. They will just absolutely you apply and it's a black hole. But as you move up, you're going to hear back. Even if it's whether it's good news or bad news, you're going to hear back more often. And as you move up, you're going to get feedback. They're going to get feedback because, first of all, you are almost in charge of the people who are handling the hiring process. So they act very appropriately. They're very positive. Because if you are interviewing for this job now, it means you're qualified. You could be their boss down the line. So they are very polite. And more than that, they also know that your value to the enterprise is a lot more, right? You're not the junior engineer making 75K. You're applying for a $250,000 job, and you're going to be talking to the president, to the CEO, to the CFO, CMO, all these people. So the people who handle talent acquisition, they usually have a separate department or team for executives. They act very, very warmly and inviting versus, the entry level people who are just like, don't email me, don't call me, don't text me, don't contact me ever again. After you apply to our company, you will never hear from us, and maybe you'll hear from us, but if you don't even bother us. With the executive folks, like I have sometimes called them outside of business hours, accidentally, of course. I'm the New York City area. I was recently interviewing at a company in Chicago. I forgot about time zones for a second. I called someone at 5:45 my time, which is 4:45 their time. We ended up speaking for about half an hour about the opportunity. And I didn't realize that, towards the end of the call, I asked them what were their plans, just casually chit chatting. And they're like, well, actually, I'm still at work. I have to leave. Like we finished 15 minutes ago. And I forgot, oh yeah, it's not the same time zone as this person. So it's not that they're home or anything like that. So yeah, that's just ghosting does improve if that's a concern people have. It is pretty bad right now in the industry. It wasn't always like this. And I wish I could say some industries or companies are better than others, but frankly, I haven't really had that experience. I can say though, when it comes to government, I have found that government is very good with communication. Like they respond to everyone, I think. But I think it's more of an obligation. I think just because of transparency rules and whatnot, they're obligated to tell you, whether or not you're going to be considered, and if not, they'll sometimes tell you why. And you can even do, in some cases, you can even do a Freedom of Information Act request to see who got a particular job, and see, what were their credentials and why were they hired over you. So hopefully this is helpful to people who think that ghosting is just normal and it's just nonstop. It's not nonstop. It does get better over time. It does get better as you move up. You'll also get more feedback, which is a little bit funny and a little bit sad because I feel like the feedback you need as someone starting your career, you don't get that feedback. You only start getting feedback later in your career when it's still useful, but less useful than it would have been earlier on, right? And when it comes to ghosting, it's something I disagree with. I have talked to some HR managers who, they say, look, too many people are applying for me to get back to all of them, right? I don't have time to get back to every single person. I have jobs that have like 1,300 people applying. That's not a good rationale to not get back to people. That's a rationale to, increase the size of your department. Now, I understand if someone's trolling, and I don't want to say trolling in a bad way, but sometimes people apply for a job they're not at all qualified for. I know this happens on LinkedIn. If there's a job that's easy to apply, a lot of people who honestly might not have any business applying will still throw their resume into the ring just cause, right? That can be a little bit frustrating. I understand that, but too many people are applying. That's not a good excuse to not get back to the people applying. That's a good excuse to increase your HR department. And I'm not saying everyone deserves tailored feedback, right? Feedback should really be reserved for people who make it to the last round, because companies change gears, priorities shift. It's actually quite normal for you to be halfway through a process and then the job gets dissolved or gets merged or it changes. I was interviewing for a job in Texas, and what's funny is that I changed from a chief information officer to chief innovation officer. It was still CIO, and they asked me halfway through the process did I want to continue, and I said yeah. I said I don't know why that would shift. And then they showed me the new, job description. There were some changes, but I said none of this disagrees with me. I'm still interested. So, when I hear HR folks say, oh, we have too many people applying. I'm like, no, that's not a good excuse. You should get back to people. You should give them feedback. And I understand you can't give everyone feedback because sometimes small changes happen. Um, and I'm glad that when I'm interviewing, folks will tell me if there's any change of priorities, and am I still interested, even if they go in a different direction, which I usually am. I can pivot, but at the very least, if not a explanation, everyone deserves some sort of feedback. If they get to the end, then they deserve some more meaningful feedback. But they should at least know whether or not they're going to get a job or be considered very early on. There should be a lot of HR folks dedicated just to screening folks out, sending these automated emails. I'm not a fan of the automated emails. I find them very heartless, but at the same time, it's even more frustrating when you don't hear back from a company at all. So just wanted to cover ghosting and just how it improves over time and some of my thoughts on it.